U.S. sending an aircraft carrier and a submarine with guided missiles to the Middle East. Israel still bracing for retaliation by Iran and Hezbollah in response to those assassinations of two militant leaders. All this as the U.S. and mediators in Qatar and Egypt are preparing for a high-stakes summit later on in the week. It's being described as a final round of talks, possibly, on a ceasefire and hostage deal. Hamas now threatening not to show up at all for that after an Israeli strike on a school being used as a shelter in Gaza. At least 80 people were killed there. It's being reported as one of the deadliest incidents of the war to date. Here now, Dan Perry, former Middle East, Europe, and Africa editor for the Associated Press, publisher of Ask Questions Later on Substack. Dan, welcome back. I mean, it's just odds of a ceasefire. We were talking earlier about the political ramifications here in the U.S., but the odds of a ceasefire now, given everything that's happening, you'd say are pretty low. I mean, what's your read?
We honestly don't know. You would think they would be high, given that there is a sense that unless something happens now, the region is about to escalate into a full-fledged regional war that could draw in not just Hezbollah, but also militias all over the place in Syria and Iraq, and very much Iran, which in turn could bring in the U.S. It's a very frustrating thing to try to prognosticate about. We know why the mediators want this to come to an end. The U.S. has an election. They don't need distraction from Ukraine. Qatar is embarrassed by Hamas, and Egypt is suffering greatly because of the Houthis' attacks on commercial traffic going into the Suez Canal. But mediators can't want a deal more than the parties themselves. That is a truism of mediators.
I guess that's where my pessimism was coming from, or skepticism maybe is a better word, when I asked you that question, because of Hamas saying, hey, we're not going to show up. We'll put up the Axios headline here with Hamas saying it won't take part in the Gaza hostage ceasefire talks. Israeli officials said the talks are now or never. That's what you were alluding to. And in terms of Hamas not taking part, Axios says there are new demands from Netanyahu. You got the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, which we already know, and you have the recent Israeli airstrike, especially that one that I mentioned at the top, in Gaza, right?
Look, I mean, at the end of the day, Hamas has never veered from its bedrock position that they'll return all the hostages in exchange for an end to the war and Israel pulling out of Gaza, which, even though Gaza has been hammered and Hamas has been degraded, that would constitute, I think, in the eyes of most of the world, including critically Israelis, as sort of a victory for Hamas. Now, their public opinion in Israel does want this. All polls show this because they figure the hostages are running out of time. So for Netanyahu, it's a very difficult situation where his public kind of wants him to give up because it took them too long. 10 months is just too long. And the hostages appear to be, dying one by one in prison. On the other side, Israel, is facing Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranians, the Houthis, all of them. Their people have suffered and stand to suffer much more if the war escalates. But to the extent that these parties pay a price, they seem to consider it a bargain, because that's what fanaticism looks like. You're talking about agents of chaos who I think are rather satisfied to have just proven that they can indeed bring a lot of chaos. And I'm not sure that, they've had enough. I think they're willing to gamble on a bit more chaos. It really could go either way. And at the end of the day, when parties face enough pressure, sometimes they do buckle. It isn't inconceivable that Israel in the end agrees to this complicated three-stage deal, which President Biden says they themselves offered and now seem to be reneging on it. And if that happens, then Hezbollah is on record as saying they'll stop the attacks up north. And that could easily lead to a quick de-escalation.
What about the timing of the presidential election and the changes we've seen here in the United States? Is there any impact of that at all? I'll play another clip from Vice President Harris and what she said on the campaign trail the other day. Here's the Vice President.
Far too many civilians who've been killed. I mean, Israel has a right to go after the terrorists that are Hamas. But as I have said many, many times, they also have, I believe, an important responsibility to avoid civilian casualties.
I mean, words, if you're just looking at quotes, that's pretty much what Biden says, right? But the tone seems a little bit different from Harris. I don't know if that impacts how she's viewed over there versus Biden. What would you say?
It does. It does. I think it's understood that any Democratic administration is going to put more pressure on Israel on the humanitarian side and on the issue of the excessive loss of life on the part of civilians in Gaza. Now, she seems even further in that direction than Biden is, and it's no surprise because she's seen, I think, by everyone as somewhat to the left of Biden. To the Israeli government, a part of the thinking had been that if Trump wins, then they have a lot more free reign, and the pressure.
Thanks so much for watching. Just go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider, and don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.